around yourself, there's a million bits underneath the floor at the edge of a cliff. Someone told me Jesus was the devil's lover. Well, we met the painted on a magazine cover. Let's go!
The song is called Fear in the Western World, the band's called The Stimulators, and this is the New Zealand punk scene. Britain's Johnny Rotten certainly started something when he and the Sex Pistols vomited their way to punk stardom. There are now dozens of local punk bands and thousands of Kiwi punk fans, and though they began by aping their British punk cousins, the New Zealand punk scene has taken on its own shape and style. But what is a punk? What does it mean to be a full-time punk?
7 roll 3.
What?
Take 7 roll 3.
So like, what's it called?
To be abused.
To be confused.
To be confused. To be abused. What do you do during the week? Walk through the shops. Walk around.
Buy ice creams. I like ice creams.
Because they like alcohol. They're boozers. And they're probably a lot different from their surfy hippie counterparts of a few years ago.
We all work. We live off the government, actually. To tell the truth, we like living off the government.
They are more energetic. They like, when they want to enjoy themselves, they tend to get really out of it in a much more energetic, boisterous kind of fashion.
Get bored,
Put
get
on a
down.
record, put on 6 Pistols.
Yeah, 6 Pistols twice a day at least.
Yeah, something like that. Put on some safety pins.
Heard of the slits?
Hang around.
Heard of Blondie?
Oh, we just sort of get up and just go out, walk around town, and then go to a pub or something, if they serve us.
The well-dressed punk about town wears sneakers, perhaps black plastic pants, second-hand suit coat, second-hand shirt and tie, lots of badges, and short hair. Glazed look is optional. Razor blades, safety pins and chains are popular. Tattered jeans are okay, but the sneakers are a must. Auckland is the city for punk in New Zealand. There are countless punk and new wave bands like these, the Assassins featuring Roger Rocks. But punk has also come to the South Island. In Christchurch, for instance, they breed a hairier, hippier kind of punk fan who roll up to this seedy former warehouse in downtown Mollett Street. The Christchurch punks are into bands like the Vandals, Johnny Velux and the Voxels, and of course the Doomed, featuring singer Johnny Abort. Johnny still has the long hair of hippiedom, but he can turn on punk just like ringing a bell. Overseas, punk is supposed to have emerged from lower-class kids facing a hopeless future. Johnny believes that this gives him punk authenticity. After all, he's had 42 jobs.
I still live my own kind of style, you know, it's just sort of it's no different from anybody else, you know. I've got a job, you know, digging holes, council. But I'm just normal.
What were you doing before you got into punk?
Oh, I was on the rubbish trucks. That's before they put more holes.
Johnny's band plays for a dozen beer per gig, and he's scornful of the more middle-class Auckland bands.
Johnny, is there any difference between the punk scene in Auckland and Christchurch?
Yeah, basically, the average Auckland punk is a weekend punk, plastic punk, student. And basically down here it's a more basic level. Just, young kids, you know, working class, having a good time, you know. Well, I think we're doing probably the best band in the Southern Hemisphere. Best new wave band.
How much have you been?
Well, I just know we are.
What do the working class Christchurch punks think of the Auckland art student?
Yeah, crap. Rubbish.
Johnny takes his art very seriously. Johnny may or may not be serious about his criticism of the Auckland punk scene, but he and his supporters are correct when they say that punk in New Zealand is dominated by the products of our art schools. People like the lovely Zero, singer with the country's best-known new wave band, the Suburban Reptiles.
I don't think we could class this as punk, really. We could be categorised with the new wave, but I don't think punk's a really good word. It's too narrow. No. The punks are the audience.
We started off as a punk band and none of us knew how to play for a while.
That's why we were punk.
So as soon as you got a bit better, you became new wave.
Yeah.
We've all gone to art school, so
yes.
we're all a bit arty fast, you know, a bit surreal. There's plenty of messages in our words, but you know, usually you can't hear them because the PAs are very good.
Arty or not, Auckland is the centre of punk in New Zealand, and a few days ago a young Auckland promoter decided to spread the good word south. Derek King gathered about him the creme de la creme of Auckland punkdom, hired a bus and set off for the Wellington Town Hall, his mission to bring the punk experience to the capital, sort of 1978, a punk odyssey. Wellington slept, blissfully unaware that Auckland's assassins, stimulators, suburban reptiles, idle idols and scavengers were heading for their town. Also on the bus are a group of young men called Rooter, who illustrate one of the more interesting aspects of punk. Like the music or not, it is getting the kids playing live music. Give your average punk a guitar, 3 or 4 weeks later, he has his own band.
When we first got interested in sort of playing after following a group called the Scavengers and listening to records coming out from England. We've always liked that sort of music, even though it wasn't called punk, you know, it used to be called pop or old rock and roll. And so it's sort of a natural progression. But with all these new bands started up, we decided we might as well play ourselves, so we did.
Punk is getting people playing.
Yeah, that's right, you know, you're sick of going down the discos and listening to records and like that.
One of their major dislikes certainly would be the disco scene. I mean, they find it utterly repulsive. It's just such an empty, mush-minded kind of sound. It's such a cool medium. Everything is so laid back. There's no real energy being imparted whatsoever.
How long have you people been playing?
Just over a month now. Actually playing practice for about 6 weeks or something. It's really good.
How do you rate yourself? Are you any good after a month's playing?
We're better.
The instant punk bands aren't all males. The young women rehearsing in their dining room here are the idle idols, and like a lot of punk bands, most of the idols only started learning to play after they decided to form a band. The Idols are sort of like an Auckland version of the Rock Follies. They take their music seriously, they're anxious about doing well. And what they currently lack in musical finesse, they make up for with a considerable flair for publicity. They thought it would be nice to do this interview in bed. from
It was
what?
the reptiles that started it off for me, really.
Yeah, I got interested through the reptiles.
Well, it was sort of because, you know, they did it and it seemed so easy that I thought, well, we'll form a group of our own.
I'd never played it before though. You know, it was
Seems so
just
easy.
Well, the way they did it seemed so basic. We learned our instruments from scratch. I'm quite proud of ourselves and stuff.
So you
None of
actually
us
decided,
ever
you
showed
actually
it.
decided to form a group, and
Before
then
we
you
knew
set about
anything.
learning to play.
No, Shona's experience.
Yeah,
We were
she's
lucky to
younger
get
than-
Shona.
but I was self-taught.
I think we're excellent for how long we've been playing. But,
And good potential, but we've got problems like no transport, no practice room.
No room.
We have to just practice away at home, not too late because the neighbours. And
very soft.
we can't set up permanently anywhere.
Well, what sort of ambitions do you have for the band?
We're the greatest. I don't
Do
know.
our own to be
You know, now.
Auckland female group.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
I only do
I
it because I
appreciate
enjoy it.
I appreciate new bands coming into the scene, so I expect everyone else to appreciate us.
So, after only weeks of playing, the Idols are on a bus to the big time in Wellington. Back in a moment with the Idols and others in the capital. Sunday morning coming down. The busload of new wavers is waking up after a long, hard night on the road to Wellington. Few have had much sleep, but although it's been a fairly boisterous evening, it's been relatively quiet for high-energy punks.
Now these kids, when they go out to have a good time, they really go all out to have a total bash. They just blow themselves apart. You know, they buy their booze, they drink it all fast, and they'll get anything else down if they can, and they get totally out of it. And they go in there and they just go berserk. And you know, and the same thing goes for the way that they look. They are extremists.
Like anyone who's extreme, the punks face problems, and for the most extreme of them, a big problem is violence. Despite their razor blades and swastikas, the punk stratagem is playful rather than violent. The violence is inflicted upon them.
What we pacifist.
We got beaten up at a party by Berries, the rugby players. People who don't like us.
What do you call them? Berries?
Rugby players in general.
That's all they can do.
Beat up punks.
Is this quite common if you're a punk?
Yeah.
Very much so.
I was walking along with a group of people outside a hotel right now. and this person that looked as if they were really interested in disco came rushing up and accused us of being punks. And we sort of thought he must have been joking. And I said, "Oh, you're a disco freak, are you?" And he just, just wasn't humorous about it at all. And then he went back to his car and we all jumped into our car. And then we noticed that he was advancing with this great big, huge iron bar. And so we just tried to, he banged the back of the car as somebody was getting in and he was sort of coming up. It was just really, really unpleasant.
But he was probably just loading you as a punk, just for an excuse to be aggressive towards you. I mean, I've been threatened and belted up before, but only years before punk hit New Zealand, only because I was different.
Any extreme movement in society is generally misunderstood. And misunderstanding usually expresses itself in a social context in a violent form. And naturally the people who identify with this extreme form of expression, and it is extreme to a certain extent, come in for abuse, and that sometimes manifests itself in a violent way.
You find that girls are more aggressive towards you as punks than men?
I'd say. And sort of
I don't
quite
know.
heavy.
Oh, no,
Give us some examples.
Well, in pubs, for instance, in the toilets, they just sort of, I don't know, really smart. Walk down the street. I walked down the street on Friday, and all down the street, hordes of people kept coming down, and girls kept trying to trip me up, kick me.
Really?
Yeah, and I walked down with Mark lives down the corner, and he's working so well, and they just had sort of all these crowds of people follow us and then sort of go away and then follow us and go away. Just sort of...
Of course, you get a fairly ignorant section of society who will resort to violence to express their incomprehension of what is actually developing.
How many times have you been beaten up?
Just once.
Show me scars, go on, show me
I get
scars.
pushed just once, but harassment in the streets.
Sort of
Kicked
walk
out
up
of
the street and get
shops.
knocked out.
Stared at, glared at, jeered at. People sort of hardly serve you, going to a bar and at the airport.
Tell us to go to the public bar?
Won't serve us. Sneakers. Crime. Sneakers
We need
to
to
have.
run away from people.
That is a sneaker.
But it can actually be dangerous to be punk.
Oh yeah, that's the best part of it.
Why not? It's a cultural statement in a sense, because most of the interesting, dynamic musicians tend to congregate where the entertainment scene's the largest, and that tends to be Auckland. I like Wellington as a place. It is to a certain extent starved of especially music.
Johnny Volume and the Scavengers on stage at the Wellington Town Hall. Johnny Volume is probably the closest New Zealand comes to a punk guitar hero, and many regard the Scavengers as the best punk band in the country. They're about to become our first punk export. They're off overseas soon to have a crack at the big time. Like a number of other punk bands, the Scavengers are convinced they're the best around.
What makes you so sure?
Because we heard the others.
Each member of that group is far and beyond, individually, is far and beyond any other member of any other band that's playing in this group of musicians. Johnny Volume and Des both came from ATI, out of the graphic arts course. Johnny never got to realise his potential as a graphic artist by working for anybody. Des did for a short time, but dropped out as soon as he realised what the shock of a 9-to-5 existence was. They're trying to, I think, get themselves now into what would be called power pop, which is the sort of third stage of the punk development. It started a couple of years ago in England with Johnny Rotten and others into punk. That went through to what was probably called New Wave, loosely called New Wave, and now we're into the power pop era in 1978, which is a hard-hitting commercial rock, which has, however, this very definite sort of underground, raunchy gut rock feeling, which has come right back from the punk roots. And I think that the Scavs of all the bands here definitely epitomise that kind of music.
So while the rest of us are still getting used to the idea of punk, the Scavengers have progressed through to new wave and now power pop. There's general agreement among the bands that punk is old-fashioned, but they don't all agree about what's replaced it.
Well, we're trying to progress, get away from punk. It's become a very accepted thing. It's trending, everybody's doing it. And we'd like to move away from that and experiment, try new things, which is how punk started in the first place.
People are getting this ridiculous idea of punk and new wave out of their heads and realising that what we're playing is just rock and roll.
We want to be more of a futuristic sort of band, because it's just a waste of brains just letting them stagnate with punk rock.
Meanwhile, the Idle Idols have made it on stage, from total obscurity to the Wellington Town Hall in just a few weeks.
Are you happy about it?
I was disgusted with it. It's terrible.
Why?
Well, the guitar was up too loud and the bass was down far too low, and I just couldn't hear the rhythm. So everything just
Just how important to you was this concert?
I wasn't terribly nervous about it. It wasn't. I suppose it was. It was our biggest concert we've ever done.
The town hall audience is a mixture of tourists, young people who've come along to look at the punks, and the punks themselves. The punks are easy to pick by their furious dancing. Their own special dance step is called pogoing.
Pogoing is just a straight bouncing, really. It's the same as pogoing on a pogo stick, only you don't have the stick. But it's just it's one of the most incredible things to see on the dance floor. You see a whole lot of really hulky guys jumping up and down, sort of, you know, a whole body's length virtually above the rest of the dance floor. And they'll just go berserk, like their energy just comes from somewhere else. It's not a thing you could normally do unless you were really turned on, I don't think, by the music that you're listening to.
As elsewhere, punks in New Zealand have been vilified for their dress, their attitudes and their music, but for most local punks it's more of a fashion than a decadent social trend. For most, the new wave is a hair wave. Mostly it's just raw rock and roll, and the outrage caused is little different than the outrage caused by Mick Jagger when he was young.
The punk phenomenon, or the new wave phenomenon, whatever, is definitely a renaissance, if you like, of the Stones era, really. It's so similar, and it's come out of fairly similar social conditions too, I think.
Do you think the punk bands these days are shocking appearance in exactly the same way that the Stones did in the early 60s?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. I think that although a lot of parents now are less shockable generally because they've been through 10 years of, of fairly rapid, disturbing events and so on, I still think that they are being shocked, particularly in New Zealand, because, let's face it, we are a terribly conservative country. I mean, it's unbelievable. Auckland is loose, so loose compared with, say, Wellington, where we've just been. But, boy, I mean, when you compare Auckland generally to Sydney, or then if you go to a larger city like LA or New York and then over to London, people here just are not ready for the kind of freaks that turn up, you know.
I mean, everybody wants to rock and roll. They've always wanted to rock and roll. And we're just playing rock and roll, what people want.
Rock, 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 rock. When the dog by the shop, shop. The population's got to rock, 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 rock.